Hola, buenos días, a mis colegas y amigos argentinos. Very nice to be with you, at least virtually. And I'm really excited that you are hosting your Argentinian Arboriculture and Urban Forestry Conference in the city of Cordoba. Unfortunately, my Spanish is not that good, so I won't bore you with trying to stumble through it. But I will speak English, and I know there will be some translation available. So once again, thanks for inviting me to give this keynote on the strategic planning of urban forests, from the 330-300 rule to doorstep trees, so árboles vecinos, I think it's called in Spanish. You could say neighbor trees. And what I'll do today is that I will give you a little bit of an idea, excuse me, of why urban nature is so important these days. So why are we focusing so much on trees and on forests and on parks in cities these days? And I'm sure this is also very similar in Latin America and in Argentina as well. Then I'll talk a little bit about how to make the case for urban nature. So how can we actually make sure that more and more people are aware of it, that politicians, local residents, other professions are aware of the importance of trees and nature in the city. And then moving forward, I'll give you some specific tools that we can use to plan urban nature, urban forests in better ways, including some principles and guidelines like the now famous 330-300 rule that some of you may have heard about. And then also how you can maybe implement that through concepts such as doorstep trees. So with this picture from Passeig Sant Joan in Barcelona, which used to be basically a big highway coming into the city of Barcelona, but is now a linear park where a lot of people are enjoying nature, are enjoying shade, are meeting their friends. And so I would like to talk a little bit about that we really are seeing a new time for urban nature and urban trees. There's a lot of focus these days on urban nature. And of course, partly this is because of what we experienced only a few years ago, not so long ago, the corona pandemic, the COVID pandemic. I was in Vancouver at the moment when the pandemic started. And we were still lucky there because actually the city of Vancouver, the Parks Department, decided to keep the parks and the beaches in Vancouver open, even though, it was unclear how the virus spread and so. But they felt it's really important that people keep going outside, that they have a chance still to enjoy nature. But of course, we had to respect this physical distancing, social distancing, as you can see here on the picture. And this was great, right? Because it actually gave us a chance to still be out, to still see other people, even though we were not supposed to be being close to them. While other Canadian cities like Toronto and Montreal, they were very strict in closing the parks. And they said, well, we don't want people to get sick. But of course, the ironic thing is, as we know now, that just by having the parks and nature open, we probably helped a lot of people stay better. They could be physically active, they had social interactions, and very importantly, it helped us, of course, reducing stress. So studies also show that in cities like Barcelona, people that had access to nature, could see nature and trees during the pandemic, during the lockdown, they were in better mental health than those who could not. So really nature became, I think, important to many people that didn't really think so much about it before the COVID pandemic. You don't have to read this, be able to read this. This is in Dutch, but I have a little translation for you. This is a national study done by a foundation here in the Netherlands that promotes the greening of cities. And they found in a national study that about half of all the Dutch people that own a garden or have a balcony regularly find it too hot during summer. So they feel that even in their garden, on their balcony, it's just not so nice to be because of heat and because of heat waves. So of course, this shows also that climate change is a phenomenon that many of us experience. So it's not something which is abstract. We all feel the heat. We all experience heat waves. And some estimates say that annually 175,000 people or so die purely because of heat waves, so heat-related disease, which is something we're maybe not so used to, for example, here in the Netherlands, where hot summers are less usual. So what we see, of course, in response is that many cities today, all across the world, including Latin America, are trying to think about greening, trying to bring more trees in, more nature, more water, to really deal with the impacts of climate change and maybe reduce the temperature too. So you see here on the left, you see the rain garden in Barcelona. So really trying to deal with, with excess waters when there's heavy rain during sometimes. And on the right, you see a little river in Leuven, a city in Belgium. So you see also this kind of daylighting of rivers, bringing rivers back into the city, while they have been underground for a long time, has become more and more common. And this is really something that you see on a pretty big scale these days. So the former mayor of Seoul, Myung-Bak Lee, he actually had a meeting with his traffic engineers in the city, who said, well, we have this highway in the middle of the city. It is a two-story, 6 lanes or 12 lanes or whatever it is, a lot of lanes, highway, and the traffic is still stuck. So we would like to add another layer to it. And the mayor actually took a very brave decision. He said, no, let's not do it. Actually, we're going to take the whole highway away from the city. There used to be a river here, so we're going to bring the river back. We're going to create this linear park, Yecheon Park, as it's called. And this has now become a very, very popular part of the city, very popular green space. And actually, the traffic problems have not gotten so much worse. They've actually managed to redirect traffic. So from really focusing on cars, you see that many cities now are actually starting to shift, focus a little bit away, more towards green space. And here in the city of Utrecht, in the Netherlands, where I'm based at the moment as I'm talking, it's similar. So we see, for example, this wonderful canal in Utrecht, the Catharijnensingel, as we call it. It's now a really beautiful linear park which goes across the city. But it's actually, this used to be a highway that went straight to the city. So only a few years ago, the city decided to change this back into a canal, into a park. So cities are taking these kind of initiatives these days. I already mentioned Barcelona earlier, a city where I lived for a few years. And Barcelona is maybe one of the examples of cities across the world that is really taking big steps to change the city, to change the priorities, right? From car priorities, car habitat, to people, plants, trees habitat. And they do it through this, what they call a Superillas program, right? Supermanzana, Superblock program, where they actually take 3x3 city blocks, as you can see here on the visualization. And within those city blocks, they're going to reduce traffic. They're going to focus on bikes and pedestrian traffic. And on the intersections, they're going to create new public spaces, new squares with trees and with playgrounds and all kinds of sports facilities. And so actually we're seeing that, the city has changed dramatically during the last couple of years. So this is, for example, the street where I used to live in Barcelona. So this is when they were digging up the street and making space for trees. And so really quite some dramatic changes in how cities are seen. And Barcelona has been working hard to reduce the traffic, to get more green in, but also to reduce air pollution levels. This is a city that has had major problems with air pollution. So by bringing less cars and more trees and more pedestrians, actually air pollution levels are already dropping and people start feeling better. And some first studies actually showing that pollution is dropping, people have better mental health, and also people are sleeping better because there's much less traffic noise in their neighborhood. So a pretty brave but very effectful initiative by the city of Barcelona, Spain. Yeah, some of you may have seen these wonderful images from across the world, how cities are actually greening, like places like Singapore, this kind of high-tech greening approach, but also places like Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, that has a current tree canopy cover of less than 1%, and now wants to come up to maybe 9% tree canopy cover, establishing new parks like King Salman Park, but also a lot of smaller parks, maybe 440 or so new parks. Mosques and school grounds are being greened. But of course, this also puts a lot of pressure on things like the nursery industry, right? How do you get enough trees and plants for the city? Water, how do we have enough water in such a dry and arid climate? And here, of course, water recycling, reusing the water, also for irrigation, is really important. This project is really progressing pretty rapidly. So I encourage you to have a look at the Green Riyadh website to learn more about it. So this shows a little bit that we are kind of rethinking a little bit how our cities are or should be, right? So from really focusing on mobility and traffic and cars, we're starting to think much more like nature-based cities, although it could go much faster than it's going today. An author that I really enjoy reading is an Italian writer and scholar called Stefano Mancuso. And Stefano is actually writing a lot about phytopolis, right? So the plant city. He says we should really embrace plants, integrate plants better into our cities. Cities should be structured like plants rather than animals in a way. And also we should have, for example, this tree street. So every street should really be full of trees. It should almost be like a linear forest. And this helps maybe to make a kind of a paradigm shift, right? On how we look at nature in the city. Rather than fighting nature, we're actually going to work with nature, embrace nature in this kind of nature-based thinking approach. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting books about the importance of trees. And so, for example, Meg Lohman's work, who talks about the Arbonaut. And I was thinking about it as I see projects like the Bosco Verticale, the vertical forest in the city of Milan in Italy, where trees, of course, are on the building and create this kind of vertical forest experience, which is a very different way of looking at buildings. And we see also similar projects now all over the world, including here in my city of Utrecht, where we have a similar project called the Wonderwoods vertical forest. So yeah, really nice ways, I think, or interesting ways of looking at plants and trees on buildings, in buildings. But of course, they will never replace, right, the trees on the ground, the big trees, the parks, the forest in our city on the ground. Those are still the most important. So many organizations today, many initiatives in urban greening, in urban nature. Here are just some of the examples, and I'll send the slides later so you can have a quiet look at it. But yeah, a lot of initiatives, a lot of focus on urban trees and urban forest. And I know some of you have also been in Washington, D.C. Last year in autumn, where we had the second World Forum on Urban Forests, where we met yeah, almost 1,000 people, I think, from all over the world, dealing with urban forestry and trees in the world. So yeah, I hope that you, as the Argentine community of arborists and urban foresters, stay connected and stay active also here, and also, of course, in the Latin American Forum on Urban Forestry that is held regularly, and I think is an edition coming up now in Brazil, I think in November. So it's great that we see cities taking steps, and we see a lot of initiatives for urban nature and urban forest, but of course we still have to make the case every day almost. We have to argue for protecting trees, for planting new trees, for creating new nature, etc. And this, of course, means that we have to have good arguments based on research for why we need urban trees and urban green spaces. And I think the three key arguments these days are climate, right? Cooling of cities, climate adaptation. It's human health, so all the benefits that trees and green bring to our health, mental health, physical health, but also social health and well-being. But also, of course, biodiversity, right? The importance of having biodiverse, resilient cities for keeping nature close to us. But having said that, we also have to think about, for example, social relations, social cohesion, quality of life, high quality living and building environments, the economics of it, right? Attracting tourists or attracting maybe taxpayers, but also food growing and food production, which is a pretty major topic also in Latin America. So a lot of reasons, I think, why we should green our cities, and a really nice study you'll see here in the graphic is a study by the IS Global, the Barcelona Institute for Global Health. And they did a study in 93 European cities where they looked at the relation between tree canopy cover, temperature reduction, and also the impact this would have on human health, and especially on how many people die prematurely, so early, during heat waves. And to give you an idea, in Europe in 2003, we had a major heat wave, which meant that about 70,000 people died prematurely, so earlier than they would have died otherwise, because of heat. And this study found through some very thorough work that if you can get up to 30% tree canopy cover in your city, ideally in your neighborhood, you could actually reduce the number of people who died prematurely by 1/3. So once again, right, think about 70,000. So we could have saved, in this case, like up to 25,000 lives, basically, if our cities would have been greener. And I think this argument is really strong also when we deal with politicians and decision makers. Well, I think many of you will probably be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations targets for 2030 for human society. And they also connect very well to urban forest, peri-urban forest, but also the more remote nature, let's say faraway forest. And here, of course, we think about health, we think about water quality, we think about food growing. So there's some really nice connections here, and the role that urban trees and urban forests play is pretty big. And then there's this concept, which is also pretty new, actually, of nature-based solutions, or the need to use nature, to use natural approaches to solve some of the challenges that we as humans are faced. For example, climate change, but also biodiversity loss and health crises. So a lot of interest, a lot of new initiatives that actually help us promote urban forests and urban trees. I would say a lot of focus is on climate, as said. And of course, we often focus about, yeah, trees and green are good, right? Because they help adapt the city to the effects of climate change, like stormwater management, cooling. But of course, also maybe carbon sequestration, mitigation, right? So in placing trees strategically, you could maybe save energy costs because people have to use less air conditioning during summer. But we should not forget, on the other hand, that trees and plants are affected as well by climate change. So it's harder for trees to grow in cities that become hotter, drier. You see some native tree species that are really struggling because, yeah, they're really at the edge of what they can handle. So we have to really take both sides with us as we try to use urban trees, urban forests for climate action. We also have to realize that they suffer from the effects of climate change, and we have to use the right species for these future climate scenarios. I often talk about, yeah, we have green spaces, trees, green infrastructure are no longer something which is very nice to have, right? But it's really critical. And some people talk about critical infrastructure. Cities need to have green infrastructure for a future climate, for future resilience, for future health. So it's really changing the perspective, I would say, of the importance of urban green space. This week, as I'm recording this lecture for you, we had a conference here in the Netherlands called Future Green City, and one of the keynote speakers, was Professor Kangyan Yu from China, who has done a lot of work on what he calls the sponge city concept. So he talks about creating cities that are green, that have a lot of trees. You see the visualization here in the back, and that actually function like a sponge. So when there comes a lot of water, heavy rainfall, actually the vegetation absorbs a lot of the water and then slowly releases it like a sponge. So this concept is actually a national policy now in China, and President Xi and others are actually really favoring this idea of sponge cities that is now also being adopted in other parts of the world. Of course, in many cases, you still have to make also an economic case for urban trees and urban nature, right? So what are the economic benefits? And here we have some new tools, or actually some of these tools have now been around for 15 or 20 years, like iTree, which is a really good tool for quantifying some of the benefits of trees for air pollution reduction, cooling, stormwater regulation, and actually also putting a monetary value on it. But there are other approaches too, other ways of calculating some of the benefits, for example, the health benefits of public green spaces. So we can do more and more in this sense. I'm just showing you some examples here. Some of the studies that are looking at what is the impact of urban forestry, what's the impact, for example, on the, tourism, on local economy. And this is a really nice study you see here called the Central Park Effect, which looks at Central Park in New York, maybe one of the most famous city parks in the world. And here they really go into very much detail, like what are all the different economic benefits, right? So what is the business involved? What are the hotel prices that are higher because of the presence of Central Park? House prices, real estate prices, contractors working in the park, all kinds of different things, restaurants, you name it. So really a major impact on the local economy. And there's also more and more focus on health. So this is a study by a group at Clemson University in the US. And they looked at, together with a healthcare provider, a healthcare insurance company, see, okay, well, if people live in greener environments versus non-green environments, is there a difference in how much money people spend on healthcare? And it turns out that people who live in greener neighborhoods spend about $374 per year less on healthcare. And this is in California, and this was a study of several million people. So you could say, well, if you're in a place like California, you could actually really save a lot of money, many, many millions, by greening neighborhoods. And we should really think more about how we can actually use this information, also connected to investing more money into urban forestry in the future. Yeah, so how can we make this specific, right? How can you, for example, in Argentine cities work with these ideas of importance of urban forests, the functions of them, but also ways of maybe promoting the benefits of them and integrating them into planning and decision making. So let me take you to a few principles and ideas for that. The World Health Organization, especially its European office based in Bonn in Germany, has recommended not so long ago that everybody should live within 300 meters of a good green space, a park, maybe a forest or some other type of green. And ideally within, it should be 1 hectare. Sometimes it could be 0.5 to 1 hectare. So this is really important because 300 meters is really, it's kind of a walking distance, a time commitment that people are willing to make so that they can regularly use their local park. If you start being further away, like 1 kilometer, you see the use levels drop, so you won't go to the local park so often. So this 300 meters, a 5-minute walk maybe, or 10-minute walk, is actually really important threshold. Yeah, so WHO is very active, but also other organizations, for example, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, issued the San Marino Regional Urban Forestry Action Plan that I helped write with them. In Europe, the European Union has adopted a nature restoration law that for the first time includes a canopy target. So they talk about 10% tree canopy cover as a minimum for every municipality in the EU, but also talk about monitoring that, seeing how canopy changes, and there should not be a loss of canopy cover over time. And then, not so far, or actually to the north from you, right? It is a bit far, but it's your part of the world. In the United States, we see also that the Biden and Harris administration has invested a record-breaking $1.5 billion in the urban forestry program. And what they focus on is really to bring trees and urban forests to vulnerable communities, poorer communities that also are vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So it's really about cooling and health as well. So a lot of policy attention, a lot of investment in urban forestry in different parts of the world. And I could show you pictures from Asia, places like Korea, Japan, China, which is very similar. Also, for example, in Australia and other countries. Then we also see this happening at the local level. So cities like Vancouver, where I also lived for a while, they've been really active in promoting this idea of being a green city, having a good urban forestry strategy. And you see in many places now, cities are developing urban forest strategies or master plans that give a long-term, maybe 20, 30, 40-year perspective of what the urban forest should look like, how it should develop, what we should be prioritized. And there, of course, is also a whole set of criteria, what we call key performance indicators, to monitor, track over time how things are going, right? So things like canopy cover, the different benefits, people's satisfaction, recreational use of urban forestry, you name it, all kind of ways of measuring success. I've also worked quite a bit with the Nordic Council of Ministers, which is the organization of all the Nordic countries, so Sweden, Denmark, Norway, etc. And they asked me to help them give some very simple guidelines for successful green space planning. And we came up with this, right? The idea of having proximity, including visibility. So always having green space and nature close by, because then you can get the benefits. If green and parks are too far away from you, you don't get so many benefits. We're talking about connectivity. So we're talking a lot about connecting green spaces, creating green infrastructure networks, connecting people and trees, you name it. We're talking about the principle of diversity. So offering biodiversity, but also offering a diversity of green space experiences. So different types of green and park, from wild areas to much more game or socially focused green spaces, but also diversity of people. Right? In our cities, of course, we see people of many different ages, different genders, of cultures, and we all have our own preferences of what type of green and nature we would like to see nearby. And finally, and this is really a big topic internationally, is the idea of equity, even tree equity, which basically means that nature, trees are a human right, and everybody should have access to trees and nature in the city. And we should distribute green spaces fairly over the city. So not only in the rich areas, but everybody should have good access to green space. So this then links also to the idea of maybe having some form of standards, norms, guidelines, right? So how much green do we need? And this is really important. There's a lot of debate in countries like the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Sweden, but the US, other places as well. Like, can we put up some norms and standards? And here you can look at different things, right? You can look at exposure, accessibility, different types of green space, like how much green, how many parks should we have, how much square meters of green. But also, for example, canopy cover. Do we want to have a minimum canopy cover like the European Union has set? So yeah, a lot of developments in this sense. And tree equity, I already showed you this picture, is important here, right? So it's very much about trying to find out where are the weak spots in the municipality, where do we have very little trees, very little canopy, how can we improve the situation? You can start comparing neighborhoods, you can benchmark with other cities. There's all kinds of ways how you can use metrics to bring your urban forestry program further. This is a report written in the United Kingdom, a report called Greening Up, and they really go through different types of metrics. And they say, well, for the benefits of green, we need to look at access, right? We need to make sure that people have good access to green, to parks. It should be easy to get to a park, but also exposure. So we have to make sure that even if you're not actively looking for parks and green, you have it around you. So you see trees outside, you have canopy around you. And ideally, they say you would have some kind of hybrid guidelines or metrics that combine these two. So this then brings me to my contribution to this, which is the 330-300 rule or guideline or principle or rule of thumb. You can name it many different things for urban greening. And it's really focusing on the climate and health benefits of trees and other green in the city. Basically what it says is that we should all see at least 3 large trees from where we live, where we go to school, where we work, but also where we are maybe cared for, like a hospital or care facility. Then next, we should have 30% tree canopy cover in every neighborhood. So not as a city average, but in every neighborhood. And finally, and this you recognize already from the World Health Organization's recommendation, nobody should have more than 300 meters to walk to a high quality public green space. There could be a park, there could be a forest, there could be sometimes even a cemetery where you can do different things. But high quality is important. There should be a diversity of vegetation. You should have biodiversity. You should be able to do different types of activity in that green space too. And this has really been quite a journey. I launched this idea in February 2021, and this is now really being used across the world. It's being featured in scientific journals, professional journals, but also in lifestyle magazines like Cosmopolitan, as you can see here. So a lot of people are interested in it. And this is how it looks, right? So this is 3 large trees. This is in a picture from a small city in the Netherlands. Everybody should be able to see 3 large trees. We should have 30% tree canopy cover in every neighborhood, ideally. And finally, we should all have access to high quality public green space where we can do things like sit and read, play, maybe have a little walk, enjoy wildlife, and so forth. This is a picture from Sweden. So once again, why these 3 components, right? The 3 trees has to do with visible green. Being able to see trees and green is good for our mental health. We can perform better, we concentrate better. And studies show, for example, that children that go to green schools with a lot of green around them, are better in concentrating, are better in performing problem-solving tasks and so on. Then we need this canopy minimum, 30%, and tree canopy cover has been found to be related with things like cooling, mental health improvements, social meeting places, etc. And then the well-known effect, of course, of recreational green or parks where we can go and recreate and relax. This actually links to all health aspects. Also, for example, to our physical health. We're more active, we walk more, so we are in better physical health too. And quite some studies have been done that show actually that 330-300 is not a bad way to capture the evidence, the research on the importance of green space. And this is really traveling along the world. This is from Canada, Nature Canada, which is a not-for-profit, recommending 330-300 as a tree equity tool, right, to bring the benefits of trees to everybody. But even developers, developers like in the Netherlands, are now using 330-300 to develop new neighborhoods and even to market these neighborhoods, right? To say, hey, we're actually doing a really, really good job here. And maybe people are willing to pay a little bit more to move in if this is a 330-300 neighborhood. So yeah, a lot of interest in different parts of the world. We've also been writing about how to measure this. And I won't have time to go into much detail, right? But the 30%, the 300 is maybe not so difficult. But how do you measure 3 trees from your window? And I'll be happy to answer questions about it. But you could, for example, look at a GIS analysis, look at a map, right? And look at individual buildings, take a buffer of, let's say, maybe 25, 30 meters and see how many tree canopies fall within that buffer. And ideally, because we talk about larger trees, these should be tree canopies that are maybe 25 square meters or so. And then you can start assuming, well, even though you don't know where the windows are, that people have visibility of those trees. So yeah, there's ways to calculate, and some companies are actually doing that. This is some information from your part of the world, from Latin America. This is Guayaquil in Ecuador, where they did a really nice analysis for each neighborhood in Guayaquil. How are we doing, right? How are we scoring for 330, 300? And neighborhoods, of course, are showing very different results there. This is a little time-lapse video that shows you the scores for Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. So you see here, if you look carefully, that for the visible trees, it looks pretty okay. It looks also pretty okay for the 300, but when you look at tree canopy cover at 30%, this is really not so good. And similarly for the city of Tokyo in Japan, you see here, this is a pretty red city, right? So not many trees, not much green space, and definitely very low canopy cover. So we have to work a lot to try to think, how can we even green a city that is so dense, so compact like Tokyo, because problems with climate change and heat are getting bigger and bigger here. So across the world, people are using 330, 300. This is from the city of, or the metropolitan region of Nantes in France, where they adopted a new tree charter based on 330, 300. 14 municipalities are working with it. And also not so far away there in the city of Nice in France, recently the mayor of Nice came out and said, we want 330, 300 across the city. We're going to use it. And they did a really nice study where they looked, well, how is the situation today? How many people are meeting the 3, the 30, the 300? But also, what can we actually start doing in the future in Nice to bring these percentages up higher? How can we make the city more, you can say, 330, 300 proof? Again, a little bit from Spain. So this is another municipality, the city of Viladecans, close to Barcelona in Catalonia in Spain, where they actually are using 330, 300 and actually launched a national declaration. They call it the Declaración de Viladecans 330, 300, right? 300, where they really call for 330, 300 to be used by municipalities and provinces across Spain. Again, I don't expect you to read this. The previous one was probably easier. This is in Swedish. The city of Malmö in Sweden is working a lot with 330, 300 and even has adopted it as part of its city master plan. So everybody in the city, but also, for example, developers, utility companies, they all have to work with 330, 300. And it's really a principle that is adopted at the highest political level. So everywhere you see here from Italy to Holland to Scotland, investment programs are using 330, 300. There's a lot of social media interest. You see here the post from Italy with more than 33,000 likes. So a lot of people are talking about it these days. And I already showed you this developer from the Netherlands. So we have in the Netherlands something called the agenda or the policy for nature inclusive building for developers. And actually 330, 300 is one of the principles that builders have to use or are recommended to use for it. But of course, different ways, right? How you can use metrics. So not only 330, 300, you can look at things like measuring biodiversity. You have different scoring systems like biodiversity net gain in the UK or the Malmö green factor. They do basically similar things, right? They try to see, well, how much green do we have? How much biodiversity nature do we have? Is it enough? And what can we do to improve the local situation? So in the Netherlands, we found that actually, of course, trees are not two-dimensional. They are three-dimensional. So you have to think about not only tree canopy cover, but also tree crown volume, right? The three-dimensional size of trees. And based on that, we have developed a national tree norm that says that on every square meter of the city, you should have at least 2.2 cubic meters of tree crown volume to have enough ecosystem services. And this is actually related to the 30% in 330, 300. Again, I won't go into too much detail, but this is now being used across the country to bring more trees into city, to focus also on larger trees, right? To have bigger trees in the city. And moving to the last bit of my presentation, of course, it's really important that we work with local communities, that we talk with residents, that we try to develop place-based approaches, right? Place making, place keeping, to also make sure that when we plant trees, when we establish green spaces, that these maintain of high quality, they're well maintained. Maybe residents play a role in management, because often municipalities, cities have very little resources. So we have to find collaborative approaches to keep high quality green and nature in our city. Yeah, then I already highlighted early on, right? We need those arboles vecinos, these doorstep trees. So in my book, Rethinking Urban Green Spaces, I talk about ways of implementing 330-300. And I use three kind of concepts for it. I say at the 300 level, we need to think about woodlands that are urban groves, right? The idea of groves as places of spirituality, of learning. Really an important concept that we've forgotten a little bit. So why not try to bring that idea back and add value to wooded spaces in the city? Then we need streets that are more like, as Stefan Mancuso says, tree streets. So we need to have street woods, as I call it, linear forest with diverse tree species, with private public trees, where people can have block parties, neighborhood parties, and where residents also take responsibility for protecting their local trees. And then finally, we all need, I think, doorstep trees. We all need special trees near our home, in our street, maybe at our work or school, that are special to us, that we recognize, that we maybe pay a little bit more attention to, and which we also say every now and then, I'm really happy you're there, my tree, because you do a lot of good things for us. So yeah, so these three ideas or concepts could maybe help us. And this is a neighborhood in the city of Zeist, close to Utrecht, where you see how actually before 330-300 was invented 3 years ago, they're already actually working with this principle, right? To bring trees and nature close to every home and every residence. So yeah, across the city, across the world, sorry, you see all kinds of initiatives now bringing trees back, even on overpasses and old railroads and on buildings. So it is really a good time, I think, to be in this industry, although it could also be very difficult sometimes. We can have tiny forests, pocket parks. In the city of Leeuwarden in the Netherlands, there was even a temporary forest called Bosk that walked through the city. So these were big trees in containers with wheels under them, thousands of trees. And over a summer, they were moved from one neighborhood to another so people could get used to having trees in the neighborhood. It was kind of a work of art, but also a work of awareness raising. And of course, after the trees disappeared from neighborhoods, many people said, oh, we wished we still had those trees. So a lot of people start arguing for more trees. So lots of interesting things happening, biophilic cities, rewilding, nature positive cities, you name it, lots of interesting things that actually help us bring forward the idea of more trees. But finally, important lesson, of course, and you know this very well also from Argentina, of course, that cities, neighborhoods are very different, depending on what part of the world you are, what the cultural conditions are, what resources you have, what the climate is. So in this new report from the Nature Conservancy on arid and semi-arid cities, they of course talk a lot, 30% tree canopy cover may be too much, right? Because there's simply, right now there's too few trees, there's maybe only 5-6%. We don't have the water, we have to think carefully what species to use. So if you cannot get 30%, right, you may actually think, well, maybe we can get 10% or 15% tree cover, and then we will work with other types of vegetation cover that are locally appropriate. Maybe even you can work with things like green roof or green walls to still have green arid cities. And I really had to think about this when I was traveling different places this summer, our summer, your winter. I was in cities like Atlanta, Georgia, that has a lot of trees, a tree cover of 50%, where of course trees are everywhere. While on the other end, I was in the capital of Jordan, Amman, where you see the picture there, where it's very dense, it's very hot. There's not many trees, right? So how can we bring 30% there? That may be much more difficult. So we have to think about creative solutions for greening the city there. So I hope you enjoyed listening to me. I'll be live with you, answering some questions you may have. If you're interested in this, if you want to use a kind of a 12-minute pitch for trees and nature in the city, have a look at my TEDx talk, because I summarize that and I also talk about a situation that we hopefully won't get to, where trees are very scarce, right? Where you have to pay to see a tree. Hopefully we won't get to that situation. So I hope I said that you've enjoyed listening to my talk, and I am very happy to answer some questions. Thank you so much for listening.